Good evening, church. It's good to see you again. Like I said this morning, we're just very excited to be back and be with our church family. Tried to catch up with a lot of people this morning. If I didn't get a chance to talk to you, you can always grab me tonight. But I'm looking forward to seeing everybody and having some good conversations. You know, like I mentioned before, we saw a lot of incredible things out on our trip when we went out west. We saw the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon, I don't know if you know this or not, I'll give you a little bit of facts on a couple of these things. That it reaches at one point 18 miles across from like one of the edges to the other. And at certain points it reaches over a mile deep at the Grand Canyon. We also saw a lot of these natural arches, these natural bridges that you see out and about, and you've probably seen some pictures of. And they suspend through the air for like hundreds and hundreds of feet. Like they're so big that you could like literally build a house under one and live there comfortably. We get a nice little bit of shade there as well. And we also saw the petrified forests. And if you've seen that before, the petrified forests are it was like this ancient forest that's now a desert, and there's just these logs laid out there, and then over time stuff has happened to make these trees turn into stones. And so these tree-shaped stones more or less laying out in the desert from a past forest. And of course, it would be really easy to get up here tonight and share with you about just the beauty of God's creation and the beauty that we saw out there from all that. And I hope that you can recognize those things. I hope if you get a chance to see our pictures, you feel that same sense of inspiration and awe that Delaney and I did on our trip seeing these things. But that's not really what I was thinking about tonight. What really caught my attention as we were going through these things was how all this was developed, how all these landmarks, these different things came to be. And you know, what we learned in reading these different things was that elements such as specifically wind and water and occasionally sand helped build these features over time. And this isn't a discussion on whether that took billions of years or thousands of years or any of that. A lot of that geological stuff goes a little bit over my head. But, you know, I was thinking that these things, you can even still see some of them happen. You know, as the Colorado River runs through the Grand Canyon every single year, it gets just a little bit deeper as the waters will flood, and they'll take the dirt, they'll take the rock, and they'll rush it down the river and make it just a little bit deeper. And those arches, you can still see like new ones forming like every few years or so as the wind and the water, they just kind of tear away at this fragile sandstone and create new holes through the gaps that then just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And sometimes that same water and that same wind will even take those arches and destroy them, and they'll even fall down. There was a pretty major one that fell about 5 years ago. And the petrified forest we don't particularly see happening much anymore, but what happened is when these trees died over the time, the water and the sand, they'd get into like the organic parts of these trees and replace them with the sand and the rock and the sediment, and they turn into stone over time. And I was thinking about all this, and I was thinking just how crazy it was, how these grand, these beautiful things, these things that we just like kind of stop and look at and stare at, and they take our breath away. These things came about by things as such as simple and as easy as water and wind. Water and wind. And you think about it in this way, you were surrounded by water and wind all the time, and we don't think anything about it. To us, they're just small little things. They don't even hardly cause an issue. I mean, maybe if it's raining outside, maybe if it's extremely windy outside, it gets a little bit annoying, right? Or the sand for the forest, you know, maybe you get a little sand in your shoe, it's a little annoying. But those things, we don't attribute much power to them. We don't attribute much to them at all, right? You know, there's no way we look at the Grand Canyon miles across and over a mile deep, and it's like, oh yeah, that was caused by water, right? That's not what I think. And when I think about it being caused by water, it kind of takes my breath away, and it surprises me a little bit. And as I was thinking about all this, and as we were experiencing this and learning these things, what came to my mind was how it always seems that also in our lives, it's these same small and these same simple little things that kind of shape and form our own lives and our own identities in just about the same way. That's kind of what came across my mind. You know, for example, do you ever notice that when you watch a certain TV show consistently, whether it's TV show, radio show, podcast, whatever, you watch it enough times and you kind of start to pick up the vocabulary a little bit? Have you ever done that before? I know, for example, when I was in high school, I watched a lot of Andy Griffith. We didn't have cable. Andy Griffith was always on. And so for all high school, I would always say, a tall instead of at all, because that's what Andy Griffith said. So it was always a tall instead of at all. And I'm sure you parents have probably recognized the same thing if your young ones picked up a choice word or two from a TV show that you didn't particularly want them saying. You know, these small little things that you just kind of expose your environment to, they are what kind of form and shape our lives. And I think it's even more so, and it's even more true when it comes to our spiritual lives. You know, it seems to me that the little things in our lives are often the things that tend to harm our relationship with God the most. Yes, there are the big things that come along that harm our relationship with God, but it seems to me that a majority of the people really start losing, whether it's their faith or their relationship with God, because of small things. You know, oftentimes they've chosen to love something a little bit more than God, whether that's sports, whether that's friends, whether that's their job, you know, who knows? And those things aren't in and of themselves wrong, obviously. Jobs, friends, sports, hobbies, whatever. Those things aren't wrong, but if we take them and make them into idols in our lives, that's sometimes where we get into a little bit of trouble and where they slowly start to tear away at our relationship with God. You know, at one point maybe we'll say, oh, you know, it doesn't really matter that I have to miss one Sunday a month for my job. It's just one Sunday. I really like this job. It's not going to be a big deal. Or you think to yourself, so, you know, every time I hang out with this group of friends, I always end up doing something I'm not supposed to do. But they're really good friends. I've been with them for a long time. I don't want to give up on them yet. Maybe I can change them, right? And so you continue to make these choices. And in the same way that the wind and the rain would erode these arches or these canyons slowly and slowly over time until they disappeared, those same things happen to us. They erode at our spiritual lives and our relationship with God until slowly we choose to have this apathetic lifestyle and we've separated ourselves from God. And I don't bring this up so that you like cast out everything in your life that could possibly be evil at all and become just this Christian hermit or monk living off somewhere in the wilderness. You know, that's not the point of this at all. In fact, I think our Christian calling is quite different to that. I believe that we're supposed to be in the world, you know, loving people and engaging them and all of that. But it's important to think about these things. It's important to be very intentional about these things in our lives because sometimes we don't notice when these things are shaping us and forming us, and at the same time, they absolutely are. Because a lot of times those things that shape us and that form us, they're innocent. They're simple. They're small, like water and wind. We just don't notice them until over time we've noticed that these things have carved a canyon into our soul or into our lives. And then we look in the mirror and we don't particularly like what we see. The saddest part about that is when we've come to that point where those simple and innocent things have carved into our soul that much that we can notice them, those are the times that it's the hardest to break those habits, and those hardest to turn back around, and the hardest ones to erase. But unlike the Grand Canyon, unlike these geological stone formations that we were looking at over the last couple of weeks, you know, a broken soul, a carved out soul, a shaped up soul is something that can be reversed, is something that can be fixed and reshaped, if you will. You know, and the nicest thing about that is the things that shape us to being good Christians, the things that shape us positively, those things are just as simple and as easy as those things that are negative. You know, if I got a whiteboard out here and we were to make a list of all the negative things that could shape or form our lives, right? If we just made a list, it wouldn't be too hard, would it? I would sit here and I could call off names, or not names, but like I raise your hand, we'll figure it out. You know, we'd say greed, lust, anger, pride, you know, all these et cetera things. You know, and those are things that are oftentimes listed in the Bible as things to avoid because they will shape you in these negative ways. You know, those aren't hard to come up with. The hard part is finding out where those things are hiding in your life, how they're disguising themselves in your life. But being formed, like I said, being formed in this positive way, being shaped in this positive way, is at the same time just as easy, and those things are just as easy to come up with, right? I feel like a lot of times we're looking for this grand plan, this grand scheme, this new idea to cause us to be better Christians, to cause us to be better people, to cause us and shape us to be better. Oh, if I only had this Bible reading program, or if I only had this one spiritual friend, or if I only had this one great church or youth minister, whatever it is, then I'd be a much better Christian. We're looking for these grand things, but that's not what it is. That's not what God has given us. They're simple in the same way that it's simple to be shaped negatively. It's simple to be shaped positively. We're shaped through prayer. We're shaped and formed through the reading of our Bibles. We're shaped and formed through being surrounded in Christian community like you all are right here, right now. We're formed through our service, through our love, etc. You know, it's these easy, simple things, these spiritual disciplines. And I don't know about you, but like as I've gone through my life, there's always been those people around me that have seemed like the spiritual giants, right? Those people that always do the right thing, that they say the right thing, and then there's like the example that I want to be like. Man, when I'm, as a younger person, it was always, well, I'll be like that when I get older, right? And then we grow up and realize that's not the case, But you always want to be like that person. That's your example. That's the goal. And you ask those people, how did you get to be like that? And of course, if they're those genuinely good, godly people, they're going to be humble and beat around the bush a little bit. But eventually, every time I've ever asked somebody like that how they got to be such a spiritual giant, how they got to be such a godly person, they give me those exact same simple little things. Prayer, Bible study, Christian community, love, service. It's the same things. We were looking for this grand scheme, but in the same way, the simpleness of the water and the wind will carve out the Grand Canyon, something as simple as Bible study, prayer, community, love, that will carve you into a godly, loving person, faithful, spiritual person. And our problem is, in my mind, is we're not consistent enough with that, I think, a lot of times. At least maybe I'm speaking a little personally here. Maybe we pray a little bit, we pray here and there, and then maybe we go through a period where we don't really pray at all for a little while, but then we get back on the horse and we start praying again. But when we are praying, we're just kind of praying the same prayer over and over and over again, or maybe it's not like a memorized prayer, we just pray for the same 3 or 4 points over and over again. And you kind of do that, and maybe you read a verse a day for a while, and then maybe stop, and then maybe pick it up, and that's not spiritual discipline. That's spiritual apathy, in the disguise of spiritual discipline, I guess. I struggle with that just as much. That's not the prayer life. That's not the Bible study life. Those aren't the things that are going to shape you. In the same way, a rainfall doesn't cause a Grand Canyon. We don't have a Grand Canyon out here outside after this rain that we had this evening. Why not? Because it was small, it was light, it was simple, or not simple. It was light, it was just easy. It's that consistent running of the river that carves out the Grand Canyon. It's this consistent life of study, of prayer, of love, of service that'll carve us into godly people. The thing is, it is a simple element. In the same way that the wind and the water will carve out the Grand Canyon, these simple things, these simple spiritual disciplines can carve us into giants of the faith that we can be examples for others and hopefully lead them into the same way. And so there's both negative and there's positive things out there that want to shape you and that want to form you. They want to form your soul and your identity. They're simple, and then they will work over time to make you into who you want to be or who you don't want to be. The question is, what are you going to let shape you? What are you going to choose to do in life that's going to shape you down the road? If we can help you in any way this evening, won't you come as we stand and sing?